Welcome to the Art of Living podcast. I'm Zafar Majid. Today we talk about the rise of Islamophobia in the UK. And actually it's sweeping across the West, especially in Europe. But we're going to try and focus on the UK today. And I have a special guest joining me online all the way from Manchester. But before I introduce the guest, just a humble request for you to subscribe onto our channel, follow us for future notifications and help us build this channel so we can create some interesting content for you going forwards. So over to my guest now, who is Sheikh Nazim. Welcome, Sheikh Nazim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for having me on your show.
Welcome and lovely to have you joining us on our podcast today. And I want to talk about, just for our viewers, Sheikh Nazim is a blogger who writes about issues affecting Muslims in the West, and his blog is mybeliefs.co.uk, and he writes very well and really touches upon those issues which are affecting especially the Muslims in the West. And our topic today is about the rise of Islamophobia, which seems to be sweeping across throughout Europe, especially in the last few years, and where we've had many sort of new people with cult-like status who are rallying the troops against the Muslims, mentioning no obvious names at this moment. But let's have your thoughts on this particular topic.
Yeah, so basically just off the bat of this, what my blog hopes to achieve is talk about issues affecting Muslims and also current issues, tackling modernist propaganda against traditional Islam. That's where we identify as, and that's what we believe as Muslims. We hold conservative beliefs. But the point of the blog is essentially how to navigate whilst being conservative Orthodox Muslims living in the West, and how to navigate yourself through these contemporary issues. As the topic of our discussion is, you probably gather that the rise of the far right isn't something just incubating amongst themselves. It's going across the world to a large extent, and more importantly, where we live in the UK, it's rising as well exponentially. I was reading just before that the Center for Islamic American Relations, they released a report recently where they said between the years of 2008 and 2013, close to $250 million was spent in the rise of anti-Muslim propaganda, anti-Muslim materials online, whether that's on TV, books, radio, etc. So it just shows it's an issue which we need to, as Muslims, be aware of, and we can't, in a sense, live in our own bubble worlds, completely alien of what's going on. But sooner or later, whether it's your children or your brothers or your uncles, when they go online and they type in, for example, the religion of Islam, along with it, it'll bring up a dozen other anti-Islam articles, videos, and YouTube clips. So what will end up happening is maybe me and you might be strong in faith, but our youngsters growing up, like our children, nephews, and nieces, etc., they might just out of curiosity click on one of those anti-Islam articles, and then that's the start of the, you can say, downfall, or trip down the rabbit hole, so to speak. So you're gonna say.
I realize obviously that you're never going to be able to stop this level of propaganda and what we call disinformation labs. And what we should be doing is countering that narrative with our own propaganda, positive, true, authentic teachings of our deen and the message of peace as that was given to us by our beloved messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But I find that we are lagging so drastically behind in this information war against the very people who are creating the propaganda against the Muslims. And this is something I mentioned to yourself just before we came on air, that yourself has a great flair for writing, but I feel that you could be doing a lot more as well in dispelling a lot of the myths which are out there in the mainstream media. I mean, why do you think that we've not been able to counter that propaganda through our own information wars?
In a nutshell, and to be brief and to the point, I'd say it's because, unfortunately, many of us, whether we're practicing or not, we're living in our own parallel universe, so to speak. I mean, these issues are growing and festering in the social world, the digital world, and we're completely alien to these issues. Like you touched up earlier on, the point of my blog is essentially not to prove Islam and, convert or convince the Islamophobes, because they're not going to convert or get convinced. They know the truth. It's their bread and butter. They do this for a living, attacking Islam, Muslim, writing articles and promoting, anti-Islam uh, culture. But the point of our discussion today and generally with fellow Muslims should be to put across our point of view that on these issues, yes, we also have our answers as well. We're not in the dark, so to speak, that, we have to hide behind our blankets and, say, oh, please don't talk about these issues. No, we can also tackle it head on. And that's why I essentially try to do with my blog as well. Just to say, look, be confident as a Muslim, as your identity. And if these issues do come up in your workplaces, in your schools, then this is our standpoint. Be clear and firm where we stand. We don't need to, not shy away from these type of discussions.
But do you feel that there is a lack of leadership amongst the Muslim Ummah, especially in the West? I mean, let's even just focus on the UK. So if I was to ask any youngster growing up now, who are the Muslim role models in the UK that they would look up to? Even I myself would struggle to come up with names.
Mm. I mean, it's you could say a fragmented approach. There are people dealing with these issues, but it's fragmented. So there's no one unified approach that you'd have in other instances. So you do have on the online sphere that there are certain people tackling these issues head on. They're discussing about these controversial issues that the far right do pick up on. And one thing about the far right and the Islamophobe is they study our books. So what we need to essentially do is also play their game. For a start, we need to know where we stand from Islamically. Then we could start, presenting our views. Well, one needs to keep in mind is when you do discuss with them or anyone in work, etc., it's not about convincing or converting someone to your view. They never change from where they are, like you touched on before. Um, it's their bread and butter. It's their industry and it's their career. So that's not the point we're trying to convince them. Our point in expressing our view should be to help those doubtful Muslim or people who are having crisis of faith. And to go back to your point, yes, there are people on the online sphere that are addressing these issues that the youth are looking up to.
Can you
So
name
the
a few?
point,
Can you name anyone?
yeah. So for example, like Mohammed Hijab, Hamza, Tawsiyas, Daniel Hakikatu, there's few others who are running these online shows and they are gathering, alhamdulillah, views and the right type of people that need to watch it, which is the influential young Muslim population. But unfortunately, with these kind of discussions as well, people can put their own views across in terms of the sect that they come from. So there's two things here. One, to keep it to the subject matter and away from your type of Islam that you lean towards, and also you could say bringing issues that are facing the youth more predominantly in the university campuses or, for example, colleges.
You see, what you've got to understand, the mainstream narrative was obviously devised by a very hostile media which is against Muslims in the first instance. And what they were able to do in the absence of a narrative on the mainstream by the so-called Islamic world, especially in the UK, they had people that they were deliberately pushing to the forefront, which were giving a negative image on perception of Islam. I mean, when I was, perhaps you remember when you were at university, you had the likes of Anjum Chowdhury, you had the one with the hook in Finsbury Mosque.
Yeah.
I forgot his name.
Yeah,
These were the people.
Omar Bakri or something.
these were the Abu Hamza, I think it was, if I remember correctly. Yeah,
Yes,
something
that's
like
it.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there's another
these
guy.
were the
Yeah.
people who were constantly being pushed out to the forefront by the Western media, the
Mm.
Islamophobic mainstream media, who were saying to people that these are the representatives of Islam and the Muslims in the UK. Listen to them, see what they're about, and see what diabolical sort of diarrhea that they are spouting out, which we as Muslims have always said that these people do not represent us.
Mm. Yeah, just to go back, pedal back a few steps, for people who may not be aware, what is Islamophobia? So, in a nutshell, if I unpack that statement, it essentially means people who have irrational fear and manufactured fear of Islam. So, there's something where you naturally fear because you don't know, you don't understand it, and when someone explains it to you, you say, "Oh, fair enough, it's understandable." But with Islamophobia, it's the irrational manufactured fear that is peddled to the masses. For example, predominantly it factors around three aspects. First of all, it centers around the character assassination of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They know if they can dismantle the core figure of Islam, then the whole standpoint of Muslims is completely decimated. Second of all, the attack line, the theme is from Islam itself, the laws and regulations, that is barbaric, it's not civilized. And thirdly, how does Islam and Muslims communicate and live side by side with other views, like the LGBT views, the Muslim relations with Christians, the Jewish, and people of non-faith. So if you see and if you interact with Islamophobes or people who generally have anti-Muslim views, they center around these three themes that they usually go under. So it starts with either number one, the character assassination of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam by saying, "Oh, Nazubillah, he was, married someone, you know." I'll say it straight up, so we address the issues face on.
That was one of
He's
the
Nazubillah
biggest. That's one of the
pedophile.
biggest misinformations
Yeah.
that has been
Mhm.
sort of sent out and circulated and been
Yeah.
sort of established as a false truth.
Yeah, one of the thing about this issue, though, on that aspect, about Nauzubillah, about the pedophilia aspect, it was never a talking point for anti-Muslim propagandists from the time of Rasulullah up to the 20th century. This only began to be promoted within the 20th century and the 21st century. In effect, it was a colonial project. So what they're trying to do is by saying Rasulullah is such a person, they're effectively saying is, or the Muslim man or the men in Islam, they need to be restrained. They're savages, they're uncivilized, they're very violent, and we need to rescue the Muslim women in the image of Sayyidah Aisha, al-Mu'mineen Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, that we need to rescue them, give them rights and stability in their life. So by attacking directly Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in effect, they're trying to paint a picture that the Middle East and the Eastern world, in fact, is uncivilized. Only the Western morals and the civil code is equivalent to consider and how to live in the 21st century. So anybody does anything against that or differently to that, they're uncivilized and savages that we need to educate.
That's right. You know, talking
Yeah.
about one of the biggest hot topics at the moment is the World Cup in Qatar, and you've seen how Qatar has been subjected to the most vociferous, hostile campaign of hatred because of their LGBT stance and also obviously their dealings with the migrant workers. But they have been unfairly targeted because their human rights records are
Yeah.
no worse. They're not worse than all the previous hosts of the World Cup football. Like
Yeah, the funny
Russia.
thing with the funny thing with Qatar issue is if you only focus on the LGBT issue, in Japan recently the Supreme Court or High Court they outlawed same-sex marriages, and the funny thing with Japan is they also hosted a World Cup in 2002. So why isn't anybody making an issue with that?
Even
So
even the
this is
even
what I
the
mean.
Olympic, even the Tokyo
Yeah, exactly.
Olympics. Yeah,
Exactly. So that's the point of Islamophobia is as well. The
yeah,
double
yeah.
standards they perpetuate. So one scale they use and hold Muslims on, and another pedestal they use the Western world on and their values. So anybody, like I was saying before, who does not hold the line, so to speak, We need to educate them. We
I mean,
need
of
to teach
course,
them how.
Qatar has been disproportionately and unfairly targeted, because what you've got to also respect the fact is that you are going, as a football supporter, you are going to an Islamic country who is of the monotheistic faith of Islam, practices a certain core belief, and it's against their belief for them to be practicing and accepting and approving of homosexuality. So therefore, it's an absolute unfair sort of burden that you placed on them to make that accepting that, say, you have to accept LGBT issues and LGBT people. Fine, you've gone there, you go watch the football, you come back home. It's not to be used as a political platform to voice your concerns against their Islamic and religious beliefs.
Yeah. So, like I was alluding to before, the what they're doing currently now with Qatar, it touches on the third aspect that I covered, which is how the Muslim and the Islamic community live side by side with other views like the LGBT. From an Islamic point of view, first of all, the LGBT issues, same-sex marriage, etc., it is haram. And when you talk about these issues, you have to come at it from a monotheistic faith point of view. What I mean by that is you have to include other revealed religions as well. So when you first of all begin the discussion, you should say, look, we believe and say what Moses, peace be upon him, what Jesus, peace be upon him, said. And what we hold our views in regard to that is same as what they said and what their religious book says as well. So when you draw this parallel with other communities, you have a stronger point to put across. And secondly, with regards to the LGBT issues, we don't hate the sinner, but we hate the sin. We don't
Absolutely.
condone any violence, or we don't condone any hatred towards anyone. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So our
Absolutely.
view is extremely similar to other monistic faiths of Christianity and Judaism, in that we say the sin of homosexuality and LGBT, by extension to that, is not allowed in the fold within the Islam. Anybody who practices it is sinful, but they are not outside the fold of Islam if they do not try to make it legal and say it is allowed within the spheres of Islam. So, how do you deal with someone who is expressing these views? We need to educate them and say what our views are from Islamic point of view, and that even if they're harboring these feelings, and if they fight against it, they're getting rewarded every second that they're fighting these urges. Remember, by default, every urge that somebody gets, or feeling they get, or thought they get, isn't by default natural. So, for example, if somebody naturally does not get along with somebody else, does not mean that I can physically then show that to that person, or I hate you, or I don't like you, for example. But that's a naturally occurring feeling that could come about. So, as I was saying, every feeling and thought that you go through, by default itself, isn't correct. You have to confine it within the divine revealed religions and what they've said.
That's why we have sort of laws made by God to govern a society in order to ensure that there is an order, a moral order, a civilized order of living and interacting with each other. Because if you allow if you take God out of the equation and allow man-made laws to dictate the morals of society, man will constantly be changing the goalposts as what is moralistically acceptable today may not be acceptable 10 years down the line. I mean, the very same issue of LGBT issues is a perfect example how that has evolved over the last 50, 60 years as to the issue where it stands today, where it also was largely forbidden and seen as a sin in the Western world up to 50, 60 years ago. But now they've come such a long way where now it's accepted that a man can marry a man and a woman can marry a woman. And they've even actually gone beyond that now, where they are now saying that even attraction to minors may be something that we should accommodate because it's something that you know this. So
Yeah,
it's a
just on that
very
point,
dangerous road that if you start accepting man-made laws as a parameter for moralistic code in society, because where do you stop?
Mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean,
tomorrow, sorry, carry on.
yeah, just to touch upon that, I wrote about on my blog as well that the godfather of UK atheism, Richard Dawkins, somebody asked him once in an interview, "What do you think about paedophilia?" And he said, in his view, mild paedophilia is okay because when he was younger in a boarding school, he was he exposed he was exposed to certain level of pedophilia by one of the teachers trying to get on him. But he said, look, it didn't do any harm to me. I grew up fine. So in his moral compass, the concept of pedophilia is already shifting towards acceptability. So the point I'm saying is the rights and wrongs that we know in society were given to us by the divinely revealed religions. If you remove them, we have no framework to work under which shows us what the rights and wrongs are. Because it
That's
was
right.
God who told us what is wrong. It was God who showed us what is right.
What the atheist and the secular belief people do not realize, or if they do not acknowledge openly that these sort of laws, divine laws that have been in place and are still in place and have been in place for thousands of years, whereas the new liberal left-wing ideology has only been around for a few decades. But what you were trying to do now is do away with thousands of years of divine laws to replace them with man-made ideology, or based on worshipping thyself, because it's about me now, me and my selfish desires. What do I want to do? What do I want to practice? Doesn't matter what God said, because the most important person is me now. And that's why we have this chaos in society.
Yeah, just to go back to the theme that I was talking about before. So we touched upon LGBT issues and how Muslim, non-Muslim communities tend to get on in history as well. We find in Grenada, Spain, and then we find in Palestine as well. Muslims welcomed Jews and people of other faith with open
Of
arms.
course.
So in terms of relations with other communities and other views, we have a well, strong founded foundation through the annals of history. One can just clearly see. And then the second aspect, which is usually, propelled every few months comes around, is the issue of the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One aspect we touched upon earlier on is how Rasulullah apparently was an abuser, Nauzubillah. And second aspect is they say that he was a warmonger, a warlord, Nauzubillah.
Mhm.
So to tackle the first one briefly, obviously we can't discuss these issues in depth in one episode or cover the nitty gritty. We're just going to do a cursory look, like an overview. So basically, the first aspect is when they bring up the issue of Sayyida Aisha radiallahu anha. The point we first of all need to put across is she wasn't in many respects in the views of many ulama. She was not 9 or 10. She was 19. There was a mistranslation. We learned from our teachers that when it was translated, the translator did do a mistranslation as well. So the figure was more around 19 and 20-year-old. Because you got to understand it from a logical point of view as well. Is Rasulullah SAW had young children as well himself by then. So why would Rasulullah SAW bring in someone who is also like a child? It does not logically make sense that he'll have to overview and look after her as well.
Yeah, that's
So you need
exactly what I
someone.
said earlier. This was one of the misinformations which has been perpetuated over the centuries as a lie, which is repeated so many times that many people believe it to be the truth. But we as Muslims reject that narrative, that it's not true. It's a total and utter fabrication and a defamation against our beloved Messenger, sallallahu alaihi
Yeah.
wasallam. And many youngsters growing up have actually been confused by this one aspect, because it's enough if you put that seed of doubt in their mind. It's enough to actually take them out of the fold of Islam, because maybe this lie can be so repulsive in their mind that they actually find that the religion does not fit what their sort of perception is and what it should be. And I've come across many youngsters now who are having this identity crisis, whether they're growing up in Western society and they're thinking that, am I, why am I following Islam? Is it something that my parents told me about as I was growing up? And there's actually a little story behind this, which I've told many people. My nephew, when he was going to secondary school, in his first week of RE lesson, the teacher split the whole classroom up and said, for those of you who believe in God, stand on the right. For those of you who don't believe in God, stand on the left. And those of you who are not sure, stand in the middle. So bear in mind that this is a class of 11 and 12-year-olds, first week in secondary school, in RE lesson. And the teacher's whole focus was on the kids on the right-hand side who said, we believe in God. And her line of attack was, how do you know that there is a God? Have you seen him? Or is it something that your parents told you as you were growing up, that there is a God and you disbelieved that? So you are sort of brainwashing these young, impressionable minds into believing an alternative narrative that the teacher is telling you. And the kid can think, oh, that's true. Teacher, somebody in the position of authority, must be telling the truth.
Yeah, you're right, exactly what you mean. So what we need to do as Muslims from our standpoint is not shy away if somebody raises questions along the lines of, can you just clarify the issue regarding Sayyidah Aisha and all that fiasco behind it? I came across an article online, it was saying this, I saw a video, it was saying this, is this true? And now from a personal point of view, if you don't know how to answer, you're going to be snookered. You'll have to hide behind yourself and say, oh, sorry, just don't talk about it. Shh, shh. That won't work because youngsters are very curious. If you don't answer them, they'll find out and they'll often get the wrong answers from online.
Especially now, they'll go to Sheikh Google and get their answers from there.
Yeah, exactly. Just on that point as well, though, let's say for argument's sake, because it is mentioned in the books, the age of our beloved mother is around 8, 9, 10 years old. What you must understand is back then the world was completely different. It was a completely different era to what we live in now.
Obviously.
So a 9-year-old of back then and 9-year-old of today, you can't compare the two. It's day and night difference. Even today, if you go to a rural area and compare to someone who lives in the civilized, in the cities, for example, there's a day and difference between the responsibility and the maturity level as well. So what to say about 7th century Arabia with the 21st century world?
Staying on this topic, of the beloved Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how the mainstream media, especially generally in the West, they think it's like a free reign to assassinate the character of the beloved Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, under the false pretense of it being free speech, freedom of speech. And yet we know that there's no such thing as freedom of speech truly in this country.
Exactly. As I say, freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences.
Freedom from, sorry?
If you say something, freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences.
Yes, obviously.
So you can't say anything and not expect to get some sort of retaliation. That's not freedom of speech.
I can't go openly criticize Israel in a public forum. What would they label me as if I did?
We all know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Anti-Semite.
Yeah, obviously. And maybe I'm not criticizing the religion of Judaism at all. I'm just saying that Israel has certain policies which are in breach of national, sort of even international standards of humanity, and how they are breaching United Nations sanctions relating to the treatment of Palestinians. But a lot of people, as you know, have been shut down in that particular view, where they are being told that that's anti-Semitic, that you cannot say that. So where is the freedom of speech in this country? Then there is no such thing as a true freedom of speech.
Yeah, exactly. So just in terms of COVID as well, when somebody had an alternative view on COVID, that the vaccine don't work, or that COVID is all made up, they were shut down, they were deplatformed. And also in terms of when it came to the cartoon issue in France, with Rasulullah, again, character assassination. In Mauritania, there was a cartoon artist who used to draw for a newspaper.
Hmm.
When he drew the head of Macron, President Macron, on top of a snake, the French embassy, they contacted the Mauritanian authorities and got that cartoonist sacked because they said that's an offensive gesture to the figures and representation of the French culture. So what happened to the freedom of expression and speech there?
But
So
look,
you can't do double standards when it
that's
suits you.
why we have they are well established defamation laws in this country. You can't just say anything about anybody and everybody. And so
Yeah.
why should, our beloved messenger, the messenger of billions of people in this world, should be allowed, people be allowed to mock them, to humiliate, insult, and they're not insulting. Firstly, look, I want to clarify, if anybody belittles or insults or tries to humiliate the beloved messenger, peace be upon him, they will not affect any form of harm upon them. If anything, they're harming themselves. So it's not as if our beautiful religion and the beloved messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam requires their praise, requires their good words, and that their negativity is going to harm them. But we as Muslims, we cannot accept that.
Yeah, so just in the back of that as well, from a Muslim point of view, we don't really get upset just when they draw or try to mock Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Our view is also when they try to do with Prophet Isa, Jesus, peace be upon him, Isa, and all the other prophets like Moses, when they try to ridicule them, we also don't approve of that avenue and the line of attack as well. The reason being is you then reduce those holy figures to mockery and low substandards that we hold them up to, the high standard we believe them to be on. So if you start going down that route, then you just have to look at what happened to the Christian community. They make jokes of Prophet Jesus alayhi salam like
Yeah.
anything. So that the reason why Muslims are so opposed to the cartoon issue is we don't accept, nor do we want to go down the same route as those communities that have gone down already. And second of all, the reason why we don't approve of cartoons is because the message of Islam isn't primarily focused around an individual. It's the message of divine love that we believe in. So the reason why Islam prohibits figureheads being drawn is to prevent following the figureheads as opposed to the message. This is what Rasulullah SAW promoted as well, that he did not approve of drawing figureheads, for example, so that people don't lose sight of the message and follow the figure that brought the message. Although obviously we hold them to high respect, honor, and love. So that's the reason why we strongly oppose any sort of attacks in that framework.
But that also applies to our love is extended to the Prophet Jesus, Prophet Moses,
Exactly.
Prophet Abraham. We will not tolerate and accept any depiction or images even of those beloved messengers and prophets, because we believe, which not many people actually realize this, is that Islam and Muslims especially also respect and love these prophets who are the predecessors before the final seal of prophethood, which was Prophet Muhammad, because many Christians do not realize that we have a very special place for Jesus, peace be upon him, in our hearts.
Exactly. Exactly. To such an extent, even if I was to reject Prophet Jesus or Moses, I cannot be a Muslim myself. I will
Absolutely.
go outside the fold of Islam. So this is the high reverence in which we hold these prophetic figures in our religion. So when we discuss issues from the Muslim community, it tends to cover other religious communities as well, like the
Yeah.
beliefs of the Christian and the Jewish community as well. So
But even
in the same
outside
way,
of
what we
these, even outside of these
Mm,
Abrahamic faiths, I'm as a Muslim, I wouldn't even go and try and insult a Hindu or a Buddhist and try and mock their sort of gods or mock their sort of personalities and their religion, simply because
mm,
we as Muslims respect and love everyone. just because they do not follow our religion, it doesn't give us the license to insult them. We have to live
Mm.
and coexist in peace with all the communities around us.
Yeah, like Allah said, there's no compulsion in religion. So
Yeah.
whatever view you have, you can hold those views respectfully within your own community. The problem then begins when you're trying to enforce your views on someone who has an alternative view. Yes, you can have a discussion and air your views and viewpoints, but then you could also leave from that discussion with agreeing to disagree if we don't come to any common grounds. So that's where we stand from in an Islamic point of view. And on the third aspect, which we briefly discussed in the beginning, the attack line they use is on the laws of Islam. For example, it's barbaric to cut someone's hand off if they steal. Or, for example, it's very warmongering for whatever he went into. He tried to take over that culture, take over that environment, and demean the local people who live there. Our point is no, it didn't do that. In fact, it enriched and enhanced those communities already living under the Islamic governance. For example, take Granada in Spain. It was the gold standard for living and standard of living back then. So much so, they even had, believe it or not, underfloor heating and drain system. Whereas if you look on the other side, in the same time frame, in the Western world, they were living in the dark ages. In fact, there's an interesting program, if you want to look it up, Zafar Majid, on Google, is called Dirty Cities, BBC. They did a program on dirty cities, and they covered primarily the Western society, how it used to be, let's say 200 years ago. And believe it or not, even the elites of those times used to take ghusl almost once every 6 months.
Mm.
And in that show, you also discuss it. The reason why they invented umbrellas, it wasn't purely for rain's sake. It was so filthy because back then they never had toilet and the drainage system. So whenever the people did their toilet business, they used to do it in a bucket, and then they just simply, just literally, just throw it out the window. So if somebody is walking underneath on the street, you have all the feces and the urine falling on you. So then
Disgusting.
the elite, what they had to come up with was a plan so that the clothes don't get dirty, is the umbrella. So if somebody did throw feces, etc., it fell on the umbrella. And another reason that show also discusses is why we have high heels, the women wear high heels, is because the streets used to be so filthy with dung, with animal carcasses, with the intestines of pigs, with rotting corpses. When someone wished to walk along the streets, their clothes would often get dirty. They'll get splashes, like from urine and from dead carcass meat. It come on this clothes and ruin their lower garments. So they made high heel, so that when they walk on the street, their clothes won't get dirty. So this is the level of filthiness the Western society we're in. In the parallel universe, we have Granada, Spain, which was the gold standard of how to live in a civilized world. So that's an example where when the Islamic laws are implemented appropriately, it enriches whichever community lives side by side our community.
One of the most beautiful aspects of our religion is the thing about purity, about cleanliness. That our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us over 1400 years ago how to clean and wash ourselves. That which even this day and age, even in the up until the 19th century, scientists were teaching Western
Mm,
people in the West how to wash their hands
mm,
properly after even going to the toilet, whereas we had been taught the next level of hygiene and cleanliness for over 1400 years ago. And also challenge any atheist, any non-Muslim to look at any aspect of Islamic Sharia law, any aspect, any ruling, and we will be able to show you the benefit of why that is practiced. I mean, I'll just touch upon one,
of course.
is why adultery is forbidden in Islam. Because if we didn't have those Sharia-based laws to protect us against adultery, then families would have broken down a long, long time ago, and we would have had this chaos that we've got now, anarchy in our society, would have existed many, many centuries ago. It's because of this system that which has been maintained up until now largely, where marriage has to be recognized as the best sanctity for a relationship between a man and a woman. Whereas if adultery was allowed free for all, go and sleep with any woman you want, then you would have people running away with your wife, your sister, your mother. You would not have any order in society. It's there for the protection of the women.
And also, to a larger extent, the society, as you touched upon as well. Because if the institution of marriage is destroyed, you destroy the institution of society. Because that's where the society
What's happening
begins
now?
from.
That's what's happening now, Sheikh Nazim.
Exactly.
If you
Yes.
look around you,
Exactly.
especially in the UK, families are breaking down, children born out of wedlock, and adultery, which is it's rife. This is why we have the problems, the social problems that we have in our society.
The other day I was giving an example to someone. The laws of Islam, they're not here to ruin your life. They're here to enhance your life. For example, in a game of football, like going back to Qatar, for example, we're in the World Cup phase, as they say. So in a World Cup match, in a football match, you have a referee that governs the game of football, doesn't he?
Yep.
He does not ruin the game, he enhances it. So if you look at it in that point of view, Islam is in our life the referee that governs the game of life, how we play. So it's not going to ruin your life.
Yeah.
It says, enjoy your life, get married, have wealth, do get educated, keep just certain rules in mind. You'll see the game of life that you play will be enriched. And what is this game of life we're playing? Effectively, we're playing the game, a football match with the team of the devil. So on one side, we have our life, and on the other side is the devil. We're trying to score against each other. Unfortunately, sometimes we could be losing right up to the 89th minute, but we do not give up, because as we've seen in any football match, right up to the 90th minute, you could switch the game around. Somebody could score two more, and you could win the game. So that's why you never lose hope in the mercy of Allah.
That was a great analogy, beautifully explained, Sheikh Nazim, but I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there as time does not permit for us to continue. But inshallah, no doubt we'll be talking again on many of these topics, because there's many, many issues affecting us, social, political, moral, affecting our youth in the UK, especially US. And inshallah, we'll be inviting you again. Jazakallah for your time.
Jazakallah for having me on your show. Inshallah, it's been an interesting discussion. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That was Sheikh Nazim, a blogger from Manchester, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him for his time. And inshallah, we shall continue many, many more topics to discuss. And what we do here is we go beyond the headlines and to really analyze the deeper meanings behind the stories and the issues, and we look at the spiritual aspects of how they are affecting us. And inshallah, we will also be giving you solutions to tackle many of these issues which are affecting ourselves, especially in the West. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, and we'll see you again, inshallah.